One of the first places we're likely to find while exploring the ruins of downtown Boston is the Mass Pike Tunnel. This is the Massachusetts Turnpike, which in the real world is Interstate 90. Now in Fallout 4, we find two entrances to the Mass Pike Tunnel. The western entrance, which is swarming with ghouls, and the eastern entrance, which is swarming with raiders. We'll start on the western entrance and move east. It's good to explore the platforms erected just outside the tunnel. We find many containers filled with all sorts of loot, and on top of one of the platforms we can find two Nuka-Cola Quantums hiding behind a toy truck. We can walk away with buff out, blood packs, caps, jet, a whole bunch of chems. Once we're done looting, we can go back down and enter the tunnel through a maintenance door. Upon rounding the corner, the first thing we see is a ruined bus. The bottom of the bus is completely missing, and we do see some ghouls swarming around out there. We can pick them off before we continue exploring. Inside the bus, we see a strange scene. Sitting on a bench, we see 4 teddy bears, all of different sizes. One of the teddy bears must be a baby. It's got a bottle nearby and a toy car. I guess we are to think that this is a teddy bear family. A mommy, daddy, toddler, and baby teddy bear. Scrawled on the wall of the bus behind these teddy bears are the words, "All are welcome." Beneath this bench, we find a Vault-Tec lunchbox, and to the right, we find a very strange scene. On the wall, someone has written the word privacy in chalk. We still see the chalk lying on the ground. A curtain separates this part of the bus from the rear, and going around, we find a surgery. A doctor teddy bear with a bone cutter is performing surgery on another teddy bear sitting in a surgical tray. What is going on here? On the ground, we find a cash register filled with all sorts of money, chems on a table next to the driver's seat, and sitting in the driver's seat, another teddy bear. I guess this is some sort of black market teddy bear surgery, where teddy bears pay the teddy bear doctor under the table with pre-war money. Continuing along, we find 2 tubes in the tunnel, one for eastbound and one for westbound traffic. Let's go down the westbound traffic tunnel first. We see evidence of the devastation of the bombs. Cars that were traveling through the tunnel when the bombs dropped are still here, their occupants still at the wheels. We saw from the outside that the tunnel entrances had collapsed, filled with all sorts of rubble and garbage, trapping these poor people inside. In one car, we find the skeleton of a woman, and another skeleton flung out the back window. 200 years later, water has seeped into the lowest portions of this tunnel. We find an opening to the left. Heading through, we can kill a ghoul in a doorway, and then turning around leads to a big utility room. Here is where we find most of the ghouls and the glowing one boss of this dungeon. They crawl out from under the garbage, they crawl out of the pipes, and a little bit of pain train went wonders here. After the ghouls are dead, we can start to loot the place. We find a raider corpse in one of the pipes next to a cooler, filled with meat and chems. Wedged between the 2 pipes is a scene that's hard to see. I toggled the free cam to zoom in closer. We find a skeleton, a teddy bear, a tricycle, and a ball. Could these have been the remains of a young boy still holding the 3 toys he cherished most in his life? Maybe, but this is a very large skeleton, likely that of an adult. I think there may be another explanation. I think what happened is after the bombs dropped, there was chaos in the tunnel. People fled their cars and tried to find ways to leave. Maybe there was a little boy riding with his family. In the panic, he got on his tricycle with his ball and his teddy and rode off in some direction. The father, realizing his son was gone, raced off to try to find him, only to track him down between these pipes, where he found the toys. Maybe some rubble collapsed, or maybe he got stuck underneath one of these pipes, or maybe he found his boy's suffocated body, and in despair gave up hope and died here. In the corner of this room, we find the end of dungeon steamer trunk with a whole bunch of ammunition. And lastly, we find a mini nuke lodged in the rubble of a wall. Looking at my compass, I realized that the directions of these tunnels are strange. Outside, when we went in, we were facing east, but inside, facing the same direction, we're pointing south. Am I imagining things? Am I somehow wrong here? Check it out in your own game and let me know. Looks like the compass is skewed and incorrect inside this tunnel. Anyway, going back to the tunnel and heading south, which is really east, we kill some more ghouls and then we find a ruined Vault-Tec van with 2 skeletons inside. The driver is leaning out the front window, and in the back we find a splayed out skeleton in a bathtub. What is this doing here? We know it's a Vault-Tec van because it not only looks like one, but in the passenger seat we find a Vault-Tec calendar. Soon we hear the signs of battle. Running south down the tunnel, we pass over a number of fragmentation mines.
What the fuck was that?
If we're fast enough, we can clear them without suffering any damage from the explosions. At the end, we find a platform with a machine gun turret and a raider on top of it. The battle noises we heard was this machine gun turret firing upon ghouls. We find a bunch of ghoul corpses lying just in front of the platform. Looks like we've wandered into the raider portion of this tunnel, and the raiders are just nasty. They've got their typical raider decorations, including hanging corpses, one of which is stuck to one of the road signs on the ceiling, which they've been using as target practice. We see bullet holes in the green sign. The terminal here doesn't have any lore. It just controls the turret, which we've already destroyed, and we find a number of nearby containers. We also find big shopping baskets filled with human bones. There's one at the southernmost portion of the eastern tunnel, and there's another rounding the corner onto the western tunnel. Heading through an arch on the western side, we see more skeletons splayed out on benches, and we find a door to the Commonwealth. This leads us to the eastern entrance to the Mass Pike Tunnel. This is the entrance occupied by raiders. We see raiders just outside the door here, next to a cooking station, and then 2 rickety shacks built on the turnpike. A judicial use of jetpack plus assault rifle made quick work of them. Once the raiders are dead, we can loot the shacks out here on the turnpike to find a bunch of chems and ammunition. Now, are we done? Well, no, we're not done. We forgot to explore the tunnel where people would drive east, which inside the tunnel actually goes north. So after disarming some of the fragmentation mines just outside, we can head back inside the tunnel to head up the western one. However, we find that it's blocked, so we need to retrace our steps until we get to that Vault-Tec van. Here we can travel north, which is really west, and kill a few ghouls who will come out to attack. Here we find an interesting scene. On a pallet, on a pile of garbage, are 2 mannequins, a male and a female. They're playing checkers or chess. But with human bones, we find a human torso and a femur. We can head towards the western wall, which is really the southern wall, to turn left and go south, which is really east. After a while, we find another utility passage to the right. Heading up into here, we kill another ghoul. We see a door locked with a terminal. Looking through the window, we see a bunch of boxes and loot in there. The terminal is locked with an advanced lock. After hacking it, the door opens up and we see a skeleton lying on the ground with 2 holotapes. One is the Mass Pike Tunnel password. This is going to help us open a door later. And the other is Detective Perry's holotape.
Jack, this is Perry. What's taking you so long, cuz? You should have moved more than half this stuff by now. I've got that sanctimonious prick McDonald breathing down my neck. Partner my ass. We gotta get this stuff out of here and skip town before Reese catches on. We'll let his dumb ass take the fall for this, and come back in a week or so and say our grandma was having health problems down in New York. Just make sure you're ready tonight. And who's there? You better show yourself, asshole.
Huh. So some sort of smuggling operation is going on. And we get the idea that someone's being betrayed. Looks like whomever walked into the room there at the very end was the one who murdered Detective Perry. On the ground, we find a .44 pistol and his police baton. I think it's clear what kinds of items he was smuggling. On the ground next to him, we find a whole bunch of booze and chems and a copy of Taboo Tattoos. Permanently unlock a new unique facial tattoo. Heading to the corner, we find a locked security gate, and looks like there's a mole rat in there. See if we can get around. There's a hole in the wall, and going around, we can find the mole rat. Right next to him is another skeleton, this one in a military uniform. Underneath this skeleton's leg is Sergeant Rice's holotape.
We need to talk, Perry. Your partner keeps sticking his nose where it shouldn't be. I don't care if he's a cop. If he keeps sniffing around the tracks, he's liable to get hit by the train. Are we clear? Anyway, I've got this stuff moved down into the utility tunnels, but it's burning a hole in my pocket. I don't want to hear any more excuses about it being hard to fence. People would pay top dollar for this stuff.
Okay, so this is the corpse of Sergeant Reese. In Perry's holotape, we heard Detective Perry refer to him. Perry was working with someone named Jack to smuggle something, and they were going to put the blame on this Sergeant Reese. We can take a closer look at the kinds of things that they were smuggling. In some of the containers on the nearby shelves, we find a whole bunch of potted meat. And of course, this makes sense. At this time, just before the bombs dropped, we remember from the terminals that we read at the Boston Bugle that the United States was rationing food. There were even riots and protests in the streets from civilians who weren't getting enough food. This led to what some have called the Second Boston Massacre, where United States soldiers fired upon protesters in downtown Boston who were protesting for food. The rationing has hit people hard, and the government is rationing all sorts of stuff: food, alcohol, smokes, and chems, which is why we find a box of potted meat, a big box of whiskey. You can walk away with a whole bunch of whiskey, chems, and cigarettes. But I feel like we're missing part of the story here. Let's continue on. Now, we can use the holotape key that we found next to Perry's skeleton to unlock this terminal, which will unlock the security gate. Or we can just go through the hole in the wall and go around using the room we were in last. We see some sort of gas in this chamber, so be careful discharging energy weapons here. Continuing along the tunnel, we arrive at a silver door. This leads us into another utility room where we find some rad roaches and a fusion generator against the wall with a fusion core. Opening the door against this wall, we climb some stairs to go out another door to the Commonwealth. We appear at the Boston Police rationing site, and all of a sudden things are starting to come together. But before we can put this puzzle together, we have to kill some mole rats. They leap up from the ground beneath and attack. After they're dead, we can loot a few nearby containers and check out the Army terminal on a desk nearby. The user logged into this terminal is Sergeant John Rise, the very same Sergeant Rise whose skeleton we found below. The first listing is regarding police snooping. Here we find a letter penned by Sergeant Rise to everyone else working at this rationing site. We learned that even though this is the Boston Police rationing site, the United States Army had taken it over. Sergeant Rise says officers from the police do not have clearance to enter the depot, and they're not permitted to snoop around under any circumstances. Sergeant Rise says that he doesn't want the police snooping around because he doesn't want anything bad that they do to get pinned on the military soldiers. But then he mentions one officer in particular. He says, if you see Detective McDonnell near the warehouse again, you are to place him under military arrest and bring him to me. Sounds like there was conflict between the military and the police here. I wonder if we can get more details on this. The next item is the current receiving manifest, and just like we've already learned, the kind of items stored here at the rationing site were food, medicine, alcohol, tobacco, and then a few pieces of scrap like textiles and coolant. Also from this terminal, we can release the nearby Protectron. This is a fireman Protectron. We can turn him into a temporary companion. Now there are two doors to this rationing site. Pushing the big red button against one of the walls opens the large garage doors, and we can step outside. As soon as we do step outside, we get attacked by a rad stag. This guy actually scared me. I wasn't expecting that.
Target detected.
But there's another door inside. It's barred from the inside. We can unlatch it here, but if you ever wanted to start this encounter from the rationing site end of things instead of from the tunnels, you can always look through one of the windows on the opposite wall and use your gun to pop open this bar to gain entry. Heading upstairs to the loft, we can walk across some rickety boards to find another steamer trunk. It's locked with an expert lock, but it's got all sorts of wonderful loot inside. Now, before we piece this story together, we have one more terminal to find. Heading west from the rationing depot, we can go through a rusting gate, past some cinder blocks and some ruined cars, to find a trailer. Inside the trailer is a police terminal. The user logged in is none other than Detective Francis Perry. That's right, the very same Perry whose skeleton we found in the tunnel. The first item is regarding shortages. In this note, a Sergeant Randall of the Boston Police Department 3rd Precinct is sending a message to all the officers under his command. He says that people have been complaining about food shortages and missing items. Sergeant Randall thinks that it's just civilians complaining, trying to weasel a little bit more food out of the system, but he does want to make sure that nothing's being stolen. He says, make sure to keep an eye on the lines. If I see another news story about pickpockets stealing medical supplies from old ladies right under our noses, I'll personally make sure you're stuck doing paperwork on terminals from the last century for the rest of the year. So we already know smuggling is going on, and it looks like it's being detected. The next entry is on shift scheduling. We don't see an author of this note, but we learned that Detective Perry is the one who's in charge of scheduling shifts. The police and the army are supposed to be working together at this rationing depot. Detective Perry from the police is scheduling shifts with Sergeant Reese from the army. Together, they need to make sure that there will be at least 2 officers present at this site between 7 in the morning and 7 at night. The army is responsible for loading and unloading goods from the train. I guess goods were shipped here on the train. Remember, John Hancock took over one of these shipping storage containers to turn it into his personal safe house. His safe house is just down the tracks from here. And the police are responsible for checking receiving ledgers and distributing the rations to civilians. So the military loads and unloads, and the police distributes the rations. And finally, we find a holotape in this terminal, Detective McConnell's holotape.
That son of a bitch Sergeant Reiser caught me trying to have a look in the warehouse. And that asshole actually drew his weapon on me. Look, Perry, I know you two came up together and all, but I'm telling you that guy is dirty, and I need you to have my back on this. Those ration crates didn't just go missing on their own, and it's our job to make sure they're getting to the people who need them. Just lean on him a bit, okay? See if he'll let you in the warehouse to have a look around. McDonald out.
Now that we have all of the pieces to the puzzle, let's put it together. Perry and McDonald work for the police force. They're both detectives and they're partners, working here at the Boston Police Rationing Site. They share responsibilities with the United States Army. While Detective Perry was here, he bumped into an old friend from his childhood, Sergeant Rise. Sergeant Rise has since joined the Army, and they just so happen to be stationed at the same rationing site. Now, Detective Perry is in charge of creating the schedule. Once Sergeant Rise learned this, he and Perry decided to take advantage of the situation to manipulate the schedule in such a way so that the two of them would be working alone for great stretches of time. This would give them the time they need to smuggle goods from the rationing site and store them in the tunnels below. They would then sell the goods on the black market. So Sergeant Rise from the military starts smuggling boxes to the tunnels below. Detective Perry is securing a buyer on the black market. Now, while this is going on, the police are starting to notice that some of these supplies are going missing. In particular, Detective Perry's partner, Detective McDonald, takes it upon himself to try and find out what's going on. Sergeant Rise finds him snooping around one day and pulls his gun on him. This, of course, raises all sorts of alarms with McDonald, and that's when he sends a message to Perry saying, look, I know that Sergeant Rise is your friend, I know that you two grew up together, but something shady is going on here. But little does McDonald know that Detective Perry is in on it. At the same time, this entire situation freaked Sergeant Rise out, which is why he sends out a message saying, no officers from the Boston Police Department are allowed here in the depot. In particular, if you see McDonald, I want you to arrest him. Meanwhile, Rise prepares a message for Detective Perry saying, look, I know McDonald is your partner, but he's breathing down my neck and you need to do something about it. He's also concerned that it's taking Detective Perry so long to find a buyer on the black market for all of these goods. He says, I've got everything moved into the tunnels, but this stuff is burning a hole in my pocket. He doesn't know why it's so hard to get rid of this stuff. He says, people will pay top dollar for this. Canned meat, cigarettes, and booze? You shouldn't be having a hard time getting rid of this. But little does Reese know that Perry is betraying him. The reason Perry hasn't moved any of the stuff yet is because he's been working with someone else named Jack, and they're planning to steal everything from this tunnel and then skip town, letting Reese take the fall. Perry sends a message to his other partner, Jack, asking him what's taking him so long. This stuff should have been moved by now. He expresses distaste at his quote-unquote sanctimonious partner, McDonald, and he wants to get this done quickly before Reese catches on. But as he's recording his holotape to Jack, Reese enters the room. Reese overheard Perry's conversation. The two of them lock eyes for an instant and then open fire on each other. They hit each other, giving each other mortal wounds. Detective Perry dies slumped against an overturned cart with a .44 Magnum and a police baton lying on the ground beside him, and Sergeant Rise drops his hunting rifle, clutches his wound, and falls upon some rubble to die. This sad story of smuggling, treachery, betrayal, and murder must have happened days or even hours before the bombs dropped. We don't know what happened to McDonald. Hopefully he found a way to survive the apocalypse, and we don't hear what happened to Jack. But we do know he never got his hands on the smuggled goods because we find them ourselves when we access the tunnel. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full story of the Mass Pike Tunnel and the Boston Police rationing site. What are your thoughts on this easily overlooked side story? Did you stumble upon it? And which way did you go? Through the east or west tunnel entrance? Or did you go through the rationing site entrance? Let me know in the comments section below. I read all of your comments and I use your comments as inspiration for my future videos. I've got a new shirt, folks! Takahashi, our favorite noodle-slinging robot from Diamond City, is now available on shirts, mugs, posters, and all sorts of good stuff. You can find a link to my shirt shop where you can browse my designs in the description below. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers get access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early as always, with a brand new video.